Yo everyone, welcome back. Brand new Techish. It is me, Michael, and I am back with Abadesi. Abadesi in the house, the playwright.
Yo, what's happening, everybody? Missed you guys. Happy to be back.
We missed you too. Abba was prepping for her play, The First World War. So what was the feedback like after you did your kind of, it was like a run through, right? It wasn't an official kind of demonstration of the play, but it was like a run through kind of thing. And I went, it was amazing. But go forward, tell us how it was.
You were front row, bruv.
I was in the front row, VIP.
People laughed, people cried, people felt seen. That was super rewarding for me when people were like, I felt like you were lifting lines straight out of my life. Yep, shout out. That's what you want as a writer. Like, you want to make a story that like really connects with people and makes people emotional, and I'm really happy that people laughed at the jokes, but also were touched by the really like emotional moments. And I'm so excited to, you know, eventually get the play into a major London theatre and let people see the production at its fullest with all the multimedia, sound, light, everything. But yeah, we had an amazing cast, we had an amazing director, we had an amazing audience. Like, the Q&A was honestly like as much fun for me as the play itself, just getting to hear everyone's reactions. What do you think? You're in the audience.
Yeah, it was dope. I think everything you mentioned about it kind of ringing really, really true, and like people's experiences are just like super reflected in it. Like verbatim, I've heard lines on Zoom calls with clients. Verbatim, I've heard lines with frustrated kind of, because obviously you don't want to give a spoiler, but essentially it follows somebody who's essentially a chief culture officer, chief diversity officer, chief inclusion officer, and kind of like how they're just going to get, you know, in trouble at these companies and how they don't listen to them until it's too late, basically. So yeah, very rings home. I've never had that role officially, but I kind of, it does make me empathize what that must be like, because I'm normally from the outside trying to sell services in, so I can imagine what being inside a corporation who doesn't want to listen to that kind of work must be like. So yeah, dope. I hope it goes far. Let me know when you need me to turn up again to be in the front row. I'll be there. I'll be ready.
Nice. Thanks, dude.
So you know what? On a separate note, let's go to our first story of the day that I thought was, I don't know. I'll see how you take this, because some people might say this is like a xenophobic, sexist story, but I found it kind of funny. So
Okay.
there has been an intelligence officer who's alleged that there is sex warfare happening in Silicon Valley, where state actors from China and Russia are essentially sending young ladies to target tech bros in Silicon Valley, pretend to be their girlfriend or become their girlfriend, become their spouse even, all with the idea of espionage to kind of get information from those individuals, kind of get trade secrets, right? Trade secrets have always been a big deal, like in terms of, you know, people stealing it, but this is one technique that essentially they're alleging that is now being used and that is widespread in Silicon Valley.
Wow.
So I mean, listen, if you are approached by a 10 as a tech bro and you've never been approached by a 10, all I'm saying is just be wary in it. I hate to use those kind of, you know, very rude terms, but like, let's keep it real. Maybe there is something to it. What do you think about this story? Do you think it's a fair thing to say that this could be a possibility?
Do you know, this is like going to sound so weird, but when I was a kid, I was obsessed with Mata Hari. You know, like Mata Hari?
What the hell is that?
So Mata Hari was like a spy, and she was, I think, a really like talented like singer, performer, whatever. This is like 100 years ago. And her power was like seduction. So she would like seduce men and get like state secrets. But I think she like played all sides. She was just like her own agent kind of thing. And when I was a kid and I didn't actually understand like what sex was or what relationships were, I was like, damn, she's a badass. She's just like,
how's she doing this?
No, but genuinely, because I was like really obsessed with like make believe and imagination. So in my mind, I was like, there's this really cool like international woman that just like plays all these different roles, and she's like a chameleon, and she can convince anyone that she's anyone and like, you know, get their trust. And I just thought that was so cool to me, to have a power that wasn't like violence or force. You know, in hindsight, it's manipulation, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
I always was like really, really impressed by her. And I just think it's so funny now to like see these classic tactics being used again. I mean, it also reminds me, have you seen a movie called Black Book?
No,
Black
I haven't.
Book?
No, you're teaching me a
It's
lot.
maybe like 10 years old or something. And it's like a really interesting movie about like the resistance during Nazi Germany. And, you know, one of the stories in the book is that the resistance really want to access like quite a high powered general, but this is someone they're never going to access him like through his office or through whatever. And then they're like, can we access him through seduction? Could that be the way to gain his trust? And, you know, it is unfortunately a very successful strategy. I mean, you hear rumors of how the CIA has potentially had dictators murdered through poison on the nipples of prostitutes and God knows what else. Kind of you hear these stories and you're kind of like, it's almost too crazy to not be true. Yeah. And you know, that's the one fallibility. Like, get someone in the right headspace and they're going to tell you all their secrets.
100%. Yeah. And I think if you were a state actor, this is a great technique, just because Silicon Valley probably is full of lonely single men who probably haven't had the best of luck with women. I hate to talk about that cliche of the typical nerd. Hell, like I probably was that nerd at one point in my life as well. So listen, you
Still
start
are.
you start throwing attention at people. You know, a little LinkedIn DM, a little Twitter or X DM. You know, these people are vulnerable. Like, I don't mean in the sense of like we've got to look after them. They're vulnerable, but I mean they're vulnerable to that kind of vector of attack. Do you know what I mean? Like, we always hear about the 996. These engineers, these AI engineers, researchers working all day, every day, for however many hours a day. And it's like, do you even have time to have a social life in that situation?
No.
And all of a sudden, someone just throws themselves at you. You're not gonna go there and think, oh, this is something up here. So you may now see companies like Meta and Google like training their employees on like what to look out for potentially.
Isn't this like the premise of Severance as well, right? Like this idea of like, you haven't seen Severance.
No, man.
Oh my days.
When you're a nerd, innit? Yeah, you're working. That's what it is. I'm coding. I don't have time for that. You know what I'm saying?
I know you're on screens, bruv. I know you're on screens. But in Severance, like the premise is employees who are working for some tech company, potentially nefarious tech company, we're not 100% sure what they're working on, can opt in to have their outside life and their work life severed from each other. So literally the minute they step into the work elevator and go down into, you know, the basement floor, they become a completely different person with no sense of who they are outside this building. And that's how they can kind of keep work and personal life separate. But, you know, you start to wonder, well, what's the other motivation behind it? You know, to protect the data, to protect the information, to stop them from knowing what they're really working on. And I don't think we're actually like far away from that because of this risks. Like, you know, if you're a defense company, not even a defense company, man, even if you're just an AI company with some kind of juicy algo, you're like, oh man, people have access to stuff that, you know, they could potentially let slip. And it's not even a romantic relationship. Like I've been to Burning Man and environments like that where people are just like under the influence of goodness knows what, and like, you know, this stays between us, blah 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 blah. And it's like anyone could infiltrate those situations and just be like, yo, I'm just part of the community, I'm just part of the gang, let's blaze up, let's have another shot. And before you know it, people are just telling you their life stories. It doesn't take much for people to open up.
What I find funny is, let's say you are dating somebody who was born in China, born in Russia, and it's completely innocent. They are not that. But all of a sudden now you're second guessing them, thinking, hold on, bruv. Like, what are you, what's your way? This is where it can lead to like xenophobia. And even me reading a story about, there's a billionaire out there, I'm not going to mention which one, who recently got, he's an old billionaire, and he recently got like a young Chinese born girlfriend who's in her 40s and he's like in his 80s, right? And he's a very powerful billionaire.
You're side-eyeing that hard.
People might be able to guess who I'm talking about, because this person is involved in purchasing several very important assets, whatever. He's friends with a lot of the who's who. And I'm not saying that this is that, but what I'm saying is you could easily assess that situation and think, potentially, is it that? Or would you now have to have a security apparatus around you as a billionaire that would say, listen, we've got to assess this person beyond regular, you know, assessment. And that is terrible, because you might just be an innocent person who happens to have that heritage. So these stories, I don't know if they're true, and they probably have a negative consequence, because people are going to start side-eyeing people thinking, hold on, what's going on?
But what's the worst that could happen? Like, to you as an individual, like, let's play the long game. So like, let's say this billionaire or whatever, like, is whatever in a relationship with an intelligence officer, a sleeper agent, like they're probably not even the main target. They're probably just like the access to a wider network of people that they can then infiltrate, get information to as an individual. An individual, even if you are someone who, you know, the person's getting into a relationship for like an ulterior motive. Like if you are like 30 years older than the hot woman that's just walked into your life, you might just be like, you know what? Let me just take what I can get. Like, I don't know though.
You're saying it's a win-win basically.
But I'm just saying as an individual, I'm not saying, you know, it's a case by case basis, but I'm just saying like, you know, to you as an individual, what are you really losing out on? Because like state versus state, like tell me one nation state that's doing well reputationally right now.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I hear what you're saying.
Do you know what I mean? Like, so if it's a few state secrets or a few this or that, like, hey, I mean,
basically,
I don't know.
What you're saying is that if, you know, in a far future, when we're both 90 years old, and, you know, for whatever reason we're single, you know, if you want to get a young toy boy for Abadesi who happens to be a spy for whatever state actor, and you want to get a young plaything for Michael, and we're 90, and we're going to go in about 10 years, and we've got all this money, Russia, China, we're ready. Send them.
No. What I will say though is often in the West, we talk about these strategies and these tactics like we don't do them. Like we didn't even invent them. And I remember when I was a kid in the 90s in Tanzania, and my dad was a diplomat, we'd always have these dinner parties, and people who would come to them would be like I work at this charity, or I volunteer for this organization, and they
Right.
were from like Norway, Denmark, US, UK. And my dad would be like, they're not charity workers. They're
Yeah.
intelligence officers. And in my head, I was like, no, like, because
Yeah.
I always thought spies looked like James Bond. And he's like, no, they're here to like observe and report back. That's what being a spy is. You observe and you report back. You're not always like driving a fast car and like behind a jet ski. And I think this strategy, you know, who says that there aren't Americans now in Guangzhou or Moscow doing the same darn thing?
Yeah, 100%. All right, cool. Let's leave it locked in. If you are a techie listening to the show and you now
If you're a
suspect your
spy
partner,
and you would like
partner, or if you're a spy,
blow your cover.
Yeah, we apologize for blowing your cover. Like, if there's any problems, we are not liable for that. So yeah, and any state actors listening to this, we apologize if we ruined your kind of espionage ring. Apologies. You know what? So let's keep it geopolitics, because this is quite a depressing story. So Sequoia Capital, which is one of the most prominent kind of VC firms in the US, I can't even give you a list of the company. I think Block, Square, a bunch of companies they've invested in. If you got backed by Sequoia, as an entrepreneur, like you feel good about yourself. They have a partner called Sean Maguire who sparked outrage basically a few months ago when looking at his commentary about Zohran Mamdani, who's the New York mayoral candidate, who's doing well, the self-proclaimed kind of like socialist communist mayor, and potential mayor. This Sean Maguire guy came out and was like, just said a bunch of Islamophobic stuff, saying that, listen, he comes from a culture that lies about everything. Like he was saying some of the most flagrant stuff you can imagine.
Says the white man in America with Donald Trump as president.
Listen, when he says he comes from a culture that lies about everything, he's not talking about the fact that Zohran is, of Indian descent. He's not talking about the fact that he was born in Uganda. He's not talking about any of those cultures. He's not talking about the US culture. He's talking about the fact that he's Muslim, basically, right? And that sparked backlash. Obviously, there's a lot of Middle East investors who back a lot of these US venture firms. They basically said, like, what's going on? But Sequoia has stood by their man. And now the COO of Sequoia Capital, Sumaya Balbail, hopefully I haven't butchered her name too much, apologies. She stepped down now. The quotes from Sean Maguire were many, many months ago anyway. And I guess maybe she was trying an internal process to kind of see what could be done. And they've basically said that the managing partner has said that we had a meeting, but we are taking a stance of institutional neutrality on political issues. Now, the reason why this is political issues is because I would guess that Sean Maguire probably is an ardent supporter of Israel. And this is probably in the context of that sort of genocide in Gaza. And when they say institutional neutrality on political issues, because there's nothing political inherently about saying that someone comes from a culture of being a liar, that's just a racist statement. Like, if I said that about any ethnic group, there's nothing political about that. That's just racism, right? But they are basically saying we don't want to basically infuriate our Middle Eastern investors, and we don't want to infuriate people who are pro-Israel, who are either working for us or have also invested in us, right? So shout out to the COO for stepping down and having the courage to take a stance. So what's your thoughts on all of this whole depressing incident?
Institutional neutrality. It's so interesting because I mean, that's not neutrality though, is it? Like, that's what I feel like. I feel a bit gaslit by that statement, to be honest, because we're like, hang on a minute, but someone said something that is like Islamophobic, and why is that? How is it neutral to not have any consequences for that? I don't get that. I mean,
Insane.
It's like that. What's that thing that people put in their dating profiles? Ethically non-monogamous or whatever, instead of just like saying they're a fuckboy or whatever. Like, I don't get it. Like, anyway.
Oi. Slow down there. I was gonna let that one slide. How dare you insult our ethically non-monogamous brothers and sisters and people out there? How dare you, man? They're doing their thing, right?
But this thing where it's like
conservative. Let them do their thing.
I'm not slut shaming.
This is
I
very
was trying
regressive views there from Abadesi. How dare you?
I'm institutionally agnostic. What's the phrase? Pioneers. What did they say? Institutionally neutral. Okay, well, definitely, yeah, not that. I guess what I'm trying to say is we've moved into this world. I mean, I suppose we always moved in this world because language is power, and always has been, where we like make up fancy phrases for things that kind of sound less evil than what we're actually doing. So instead of being like, yeah, we don't give a damn about Muslims, or we don't care that he said this, or we know that this is Islamophobic, but we're not doing anything about it, or we have a lot of Jewish investors, Israeli companies, we don't want to piss them off. We've picked a side. We just don't want to explicitly say we've picked a side. So we're going to say we haven't picked a side. And it's like, okay. So I don't know, like, I think sometimes you really, as an individual, have to pause for a second and kind of go, let me actually break this down for myself, because a statement isn't necessarily going to give me the truth or reveal the truth or let me know how I, as an individual, can react to that. But I mean, It's a sad time, personally, I feel, to work in startups because you're either in two camps. You're either in the camp that's kind of like stopped caring, where you're
Mm-hmm.
just like, okay, tech is hyper capitalist, it's very white, it's very male, it's also very, Israeli, like in terms of successful companies, money, the like attachment to the US, at least this side, of the tech ecosystem I'm talking about, where we are UK US. And you're like, yeah, and everyone's talking about like defense companies as like the next big thing, and like, AI weapons, and I'm just gonna like put my values or ethics to one side, or maybe I never had them in the first place, and I'm just gonna like ride the wave. So there's like one camp of people who are like, let me just keep my head out of it.
Mm.
I'm institutionally neutral or whatever, and they'll tell
Right.
themselves they're individual neutral. And then there's the other camp of people who do care and can't separate their values, their ethics, the oppression and genocide from the people behind them, the actors behind them, the people who are choosing to stay silent or choosing to not do anything, who are starting to feel a bit like, oh man, I like kind of got into tech because I was really excited about its potential to change the world, and everyone was talking about all these cool things that we could do. And now that the cool things to do have gotten a bit awkward or hard or messy, everyone's just bailing. And it makes me like really depressed and sad. And I feel like I'm in that bucket of people. And I'm trying to like find my way to stay engaged with issues that I care about without also burning out, and without also like making myself a target
Yeah.
more so than I already am, just by virtue of being a Black and Asian woman, by virtue of speaking about anti-racism, all this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So it's hard. And I find it so interesting when some of the most privileged people like opt out of that hard. People say all the time, choose your hard. And I think a lot
Mm.
of us are choosing our hard very actively. But there are some people who are like, I'm not choosing hard at all. And I see you and I'm judging you very badly.
Yeah. I forgot to mention, apparently over 1,000 founders and tech professionals signed an open letter demanding action. So kudos to those individuals and kudos to the COO who stepped down. And I think the
Yeah.
future will have to be, entrepreneurs and founders potentially rejecting capital from institutions that they don't support or respect. And that's the only way that can really move these people, because money rules all, unfortunately. Letters and, open letters and protests doesn't seem to move the needle that much in Silicon Valley, unfortunately. Something else I wanted to talk about then, moving on to the economy in general. I read a
Your favorite subject.
Yeah, I know, the economy. I mean, we got to know what's going on with the economy, otherwise we're going to be
Hey,
broke.
you got any
So I read a
comments in the
great
house?
Substack article by a guy called Lindy Man, and he's essentially arguing, are we in the new Gilded Age? Essentially, layoffs are at the highest since 2020. 58% of college grads are still job hunting, and hiring is at its lowest since 2009, which is insane. But essentially, you go to a restaurant, high-end restaurant, it's packed. You go to a super expensive coffee shop, it costs you $20 to get a coffee and a muffin, people are buying it. There was a recent article about a lady who charges $30,000 to help you name your baby. So the middle to top end,
I
or
need
at
to
least
get
the
into
upper,
that business.
exactly, the upper middle to the top end seems to be in almost the Gilded Age, right? Stocks are at an all-time high, and that essentially he's basically arguing that this era creates weird markets and new opportunities to make money, such as 30K to name your baby, where you're selling this kind of mystical edge, right, or unproven peptides that can make you live forever, right? Does it ring true that we are in this sort of era where it's always been the haves and the haves not, but now the dichotomy has never been more obvious, right? Because I went out recently and it was like $45 for a burger and chips, and I was like, guys, I'm not coming to these restaurants no more. I'm done. Because I
And
still
that was
remember when,
McDonald's.
and bro, listen, McDonald's ain't that far behind. That's a joke, but that's not even that far behind. Because I remember going out and it was a $12, $10, 15, and that was even then. All right, cool. We could, it is what it is. But 40, and who's out here? These places are packed. But I don't know. What say you? Are we in the new Gilded Age?
When was the original Gilded Age? The 1920s?
1920, just before the Great Depression, right? Which does not bode well, basically.
My hot take on this is that no, we're not in the new Gilded Age. It's
Mm.
just a hallmark of capitalism that the gap between the richest and the poorest is always widening. And if you take two extremes of the spectrum, you're always going to find absurd things. You're going to find people who've never been on a plane and people who fly a private jet. You're going to find a kid that goes to school and can't even access a free meal, and a kid who got their brunch at Joe and the Juice on the way in. Like, that's just capitalism, that even in a world of great excess, you will find people who are struggling.
Yeah.
And there's like a really famous quote, I can't remember who it is by, but something to that effect, that like it's like a hallmark of capitalism that even with the greatest of excesses, there's always someone who's like really, really struggling. And Thomas Piketty wrote a book about that. Capital. When did Capital come
yeah.
out? That's like 10 years old, maybe even
Yeah.
older.
Yeah, it's a very old book now.
So I think one of the things that I am increasingly interested in doing, because I'm a bit older as well, is actually like looking at patterns and cycles. Because if you think about it, modern civilizations, like 100 years old, we have access to a lot of data, the most amount of data that we've ever had as, you know, humans and species, in terms of economic data, behavioral data, psychological, sociological. So I think I'm just more interested in like, okay, well, when there have been times where these conditions have occurred in the past, you know, what are some of the things that happened? What were some of the risks? And we're already observing them, right? Like rise of the far right, xenophobic sentiments, oligarchs, autocrats. And then as individuals, okay, well, what do we learn from the past to try and protect ourselves, or protect our interests, or protect our values? What do you think? You think we're in a new Gilded Age?
I mean, yeah, whatever term you use, I think there's definitely multiple economies now. You know, it's not just two. I would say two is probably simplistic. There's the people who are at the bottom who've always suffered and probably are going to be like, guys, what else is new? There's a top tier of people who are obviously living in a level of wealth that you can't fathom, and then there are people who are also kind of crouching near that, who are willing to spend money. Upper middle class, they've got money in the stock market, they probably work at a big tech company, they're a lawyer earning 6 figures plus, or multiple 6 figures, and are willing to spend money on things like naming a baby, whatever, right?
I mean, that's stupid. 30 grand, save that for the baby.
Yeah. And my biggest worry is what happens if there is a major recession to those people who are in that bucket of like looking for work, can't find work, or are very lowly paid, or like what level of suffering now falls onto people who are already suffering in this current economy. What happens if we go into some sort of deep depression? Because, for example, the stock market is heavily biased towards AI stocks. A lot of those AI stocks might not necessarily even work out to be real. You know, there's a lot of money flowing between Nvidia and OpenAI, where Nvidia is investing in OpenAI. OpenAI is then taking that money and buying Nvidia assets, such as their chips. So there's a lot of like fugazi, like
the VC circle jerk.
Yes, is there any real wealth being generated here? And what happens when that bubble pops and then the stock market crashes in half? And then all of a sudden, people that are rich who are spending money in these restaurants then say, well, we can't spend no more. Then the restaurant workers are screwed.
But we know what's going to happen because it's happened before. We're going to have foreclosures. We're going to have people who don't have a safety net putting pressure on public welfare services, which will then themselves be overstretched. We're going to have more demand for food banks. All of these like third sector organizations will be like more in need and more in demand. When will the AI bubble burst?
Who knows? The thing about bubbles is that nobody, if you could predict the top, you would be a rich person every single time. and sometimes people don't, you know, they sell early and they actually regret it because they probably would have made a bunch more money even if they stayed at the top of the bubble, basically, right? So these things are very hard to predict. I don't know. I'm still invested in the market, so I'll tell you what I'm doing. So not financial advice. I'm still invested. So I'm obviously not somebody who's trying to cash out and wait for the bubble to pop. I still think you're better off just holding long term, especially if you've got broad diversified index funds. Again, not financial advice, but yeah, it's hard to know. It could be soon. It could be soon because really and truly, like AI is helping a little bit, but it's not creating new products and services that are revolutionizing anything. It's really good at efficiency. It's really good at, you know, helping maybe you do things a bit quicker. But I'm not seeing it yet where, until I probably see robotics in everyone's households that can do work that, you know, previously only people could do, then
we won't be able to afford the electricity to charge them.
Essentially. Okay, cool. Should we just do one quick Patreon story for our Patreon? Not a quick one, a nice Patreon story. All right, cool. If you want to subscribe to our Patreon to hear this next story, please subscribe. You get extra content, ad-free content.
I'm pointing like there's a button.
Yeah, subscribe now. All right, cool. Peace. We're going to talk about LVMH apparently wants to sell 50% of a stake in Fenty Beauty. The company's owned both by them and Rihanna, and actually I think it was incubated by both of themselves, but rumor has it now they have engaged an investment bank to sell their half.
To watch the full episode, subscribe at patreon.com/techish. You'll get access to all full-length episodes, no adverts, the chance to submit your questions into the show, and early bird discounted tickets to our live shows. Subscribe for as little as $5 a month.